So today I wanted to show you how to transplant your seedlings into larger pots, because it's that time of year when we're starting to have to move some of these little guys out of their tiny spaces into larger areas. And my baby's sleeping right now, taking a nap. So I'm going to use this opportunity to show you how I do this very simply and some best practices I've learned along the way, because it's not just about taking them out and just plopping them into a pot. Although you could, and maybe it'll work out for you. But I have some other things that I've learned that make this process foolproof. So let's get started. Welcome to True Freedom Permaculture, where I show you all the tips and tricks you need to have a green thumb, even if you weren't born with one. So deciding on containers, and I know some of you might be having the question, why don't I just take these seedlings and automatically put them into the ground directly? And the reason is I have a garden bed where I have wood chips as mulch, and the mulch pieces are actually pretty big, and these guys are still pretty tiny and delicate. So I am concerned that they're too small for me to put directly into the ground. And in some of the areas where I think I might be planting these, I honestly just don't have the garden bed prepared yet. So this way it'll buy me some time. But as you can see, these are getting pretty big, especially this one here. And I have a feeling, I haven't pulled them out yet, but they're going to start to become root bound, which is when all the roots kind of tangle up amongst one another, and you don't want that. So they are outgrowing their containers, which is why I'm transplanting them into a larger container today, which will allow them to grow and for the root systems to continue to develop. And then by the time I'm ready to plant them in the ground, they will have had time to spread out. Today I'm planting echinacea, which is also known as the coneflower. They have these beautiful blooms that attract a lot of insects, including butterflies, which I really like seeing in the garden, so I am looking forward to that. The first thing I recommend you do is to take some water and give your starts in the original container a nice watering. Let that soak in for at least several minutes before you plan on doing the transplanting. That way I've found it's much easier to remove the seedlings from their individual cells, because if the soil's too dry, I feel like the soil tends to stick inside the container and the root system is more likely to break apart, and that's not what you want. So definitely give them a water beforehand. Now when it comes to the container that you want to use, you have options. So for example, if you're starting a herb garden and you have a setup like on your back deck or something with herbs, you might be taking a single herb or plant and putting it into a single pot. Or in my case, because as I mentioned, I will be eventually putting them into a garden bed, I am going to use an old salad container. These are my trusty standbys if you've seen any of my other videos. I've already poked some drainage holes into the bottom, and I'm just going to be transplanting them into here, all of them. This will give them more room to grow, but I'm not going to waste the time by putting them all into separate containers, because eventually they are going to be transplanted out into the garden beds. Now, I know some of you might be wondering, well, why didn't you just start the seeds directly in this container already, in the larger container? You could do that. I have two reasons why I didn't. One is that you should see my setup in my living room. I have one south-facing window that's really big, and I have like a buffet or credenza underneath it, and that is where all of my seedlings are at the moment. And there's very limited space. So if I had started with a larger container, not everything would have fit. The second reason is that if you have larger amounts of soil, then you might be hearing some wind. I'm in my greenhouse right now, so I can't really control for the background noise, so it is what it is. But if you have larger amounts of soil in the container, it's going to take more water. And again, because in my case, I had a newborn, still do, and so I just didn't want to take all the time and the resources of the water to be watering these with so much water every day or every other day. So that's why I didn't transplant directly into the large container, but like I said, you can do that if that's something that you want to do. For this little project, you will need a container. You will need some potting soil. I mean, everyone knows what potting soil looks like, right? I'm holding this huge bag up like you've never seen soil before. Potting soil. You will need some water. your seedlings, of course. And this is optional, but wood chips, little pieces of branches, small pieces of wood like this are going to come in handy. Don't need them, but I do like to use them. So I'm going to start by adding my potting soil into this container here. And if you saw my video on just almost knocked that over. If you saw my video on starting seeds, you saw that I like to premix the soil with the water, and in that video I did it in a bowl. It is so much easier to water the soil when you mix it up by hand first, because if you try to pour water on really dry soil like this, then it tends to just run off and it doesn't soak in very well. So what I'm going to do here is, instead of using a separate bowl, I'm just going to mix it into my large container. So if you're planting into a single pot or a large pot, then this will work as well. So I'm just going to add my water, and I'm going to mix it by hand until it becomes the consistency of wet sand. And this way also you know exactly how much soil you need, because a lot of times when you water it, the soil level will shrink down. And this way the soil will already be pre-moistened, so you know exactly how much you need in there. So as you can see, the soil level has shrunk down a bit. So I'm gonna add some more soil. So notice that I haven't filled it completely to the top. There's a little bit of room here, and you're gonna see why in just a second. I'm just poking holes. Let's see, now I have to count how many echinacea seedlings I actually have, because some of these cells have 2 in them. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Great, so I did 2 in each cell, and so 7 out of 8, that's not bad. I'll take that for a germination rate. So I'm gonna make 7 holes. And I'm just punching as deep down as I can, because you want as much space for those roots to grow as you possibly can. So you can see that there, 7 holes. Okay, now we pre-watered these, so hopefully these should come out relatively easily. Yep, they just kind of pop out and the cell is pretty much intact. So what we're going to do is we're going to split these up, and you'll get a feel for it, but you just kind of gently tease them apart, because you don't want to break the roots. You're inevitably going to break a few, but you want to keep them as much intact as you can. So now I've got my 2 seedlings here. So I'm just going to set that guy there. And then I'm just going to drop this into the hole that I've made gently, and just gently pack this in, not too tight, but snug. And I will plant them pretty far up, usually until the first cotyledon here. You could do until the first true leaf, but I don't think this is deep enough for me to do that. Now, if this was really root bound, you would see, because it would have roots running across and it would be mostly white. It would be mostly root at this point, but this one still looks okay. But if that were the case, I would gently break that apart, even though you're going to break some of the roots, because that way it encourages the roots to spread out, as opposed to if they're root bound and you just plopped this in as it was, then the roots would just kind of wrap around each other. There's a chance of that, and they wouldn't spread out and grow like they're supposed to. Okay, so now I have all of them transplanted into here, and this is where the wood chips are going to come in handy. I'm going to take them, and what I like to do is I like to spread them out all over, and this will be your mulch layer. you're not quite done yet. You're gonna give this one last watering, because if you didn't, the dry mulch would just wick out all of the moisture that you went to the trouble of putting into your soil. And now we're all done. Here's an update on my echinacea seedlings just a few days later, and it's crazy to me how fast they grow once they're moved into a larger container. Now you know how easy it is to pot things into larger containers, but you also have some tips for making it a success each and every time you do it, because if you spend so much time cultivating them from tiny little seeds into seedlings, you want to ensure that you continue the process along the way so that they eventually become healthy and happy plants. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all soon.